KLTV sound check, KLTV sound check. KLTV sound check, KLTV sound check. KLTV audio check, KLTV audio check.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday meeting of the BOCC. Are you ready, Commissioner Morrison?
Well, at my age, I have to move more slowly than the
Yeah.
rest of you.
If you want to join me, we'll rise and do the pledge. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. I'll ask Commissioner Mortensen for review of the minutes.
There was ample discussion last week about decisions that the chairman will have to do without us in the future, and we're very sad about that. So anyhow, I did review the minutes of the activities last week, and I moved to approve those minutes.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. We have any questions, corrections, anything? Okay, seeing none, call for a vote. Those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Also vote aye. Thank you. I'll run down consent agenda. The first one is we have two different call for hearings. One is on November 12th at 9:30 a.m. It's we have a 2-year budget, but we'll be looking at any amended stuff that may have to take place in 2025. So we're that hearing will be held once again November 12th at 9:30. Also this afternoon, you'll see us kick off 1:30. We're kicking off budget talks for 2025. So we will be starting that this afternoon. The second public hearing will be December 3rd at 9:30 for property tax and assessment discussion. So those are two hearing dates. Agreements, contract bids. We have a completion letter to Compass Construction for the Slide Creek Road realignment. That was completed in June. It was initially bid at $278,900 and change, and it actually came in at $251,480. So we have an agreement with Department of Enterprise Services funding for Cowlitz County Hall of Justice. We're doing an audit on the Hall of Justice through a company called Millig. You all know we have some issues over there, and they're going to run through and do some assessments for us. We have a contract amendment with Department of Corrections. It's adding language allowing billing for the last day of an incarcerated individual stay. So they've added pay for the last day of a stay. The next three are all interagency agreements with Cowlitz County Noxious Weed. The first one is with the Department of Agriculture to treat some noxious weeds of false brome and milk thistle. It's a $5,000 grant they received. The second one is a $2,300 grant they received from Department of Fish and Wildlife relating to the Follert Creek hatchery. And the third one they received is a $20,559 grant they received from the Department of Ecology to obtain the Washington Conservation Course for a portion of the 2005 grant season. She said yesterday they'll have the Conservation Corps for about 3 weeks, and they'll be working up in the monument. So those are 3 grants that Noxious Weed came through with. Next 2 are resolutions. It's budget season and stuff, so you're going to see more of this as diking districts approve their budget and they send them to us, and that's what this is. First one is for diking district number 3. These are both over in Kelso, and diking district number 1. In correspondence, we received a letter that Bob Gregory is resigning from his position from the Board of Directors for the Cowlitz Public Facilities District. And letters B through I are thank you letters for applying for the Board of Health on folks that did not get accepted. One is Diane Cooper, Jennifer Leach, Margaret Lepick, Mary Jane Malink, Dr. Michael Grubbs, Michael Phillips, Theodore Grammount, and Dr. Timothy Randall. And then finally, I have vouchers for the week in amount of $12,898,483.70. And that's consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman, the call for hearings that you mentioned include the November 12th public hearing. That is an important one for setting tax assessments. Remember, we're limited to no more than a 1% increase over the previous year's revenue coming from property taxes, with a few exceptions. And so November 12th will be the public hearing. We do have to take a decision, I think, on setting that assessment rate before the end of November. So public hearing is important on that. The second public hearing was the one where we talk about amending the budget.
Okay.
With that in mind, I'd like to move that we approve today's consent agenda as presented by staff.
Okay, I have a motion to approve, and I see we have, go ahead, Ron.
Okay, item number 3 on the agreements and energy audit. I'm presuming that's a typo. That's $24,880, not $248,000 for an energy audit.
No, that's not a typo. It's a pretty extensive review.
I hope you have a very detailed expectation for $250,000 or $1 million.
My understanding of it is that they will be producing essentially the blueprint on how to proceed to solve the problem. So, for example, we know that parts of the building are too hot and other parts are too cold, all that kind of stuff. That takes a fair amount of engineering to solve a problem with the minimum amount of disruption. I think that's what's on the plate. But if we have Susan on, that would be.
It'd be Savannah.
It'd be Savannah, yeah.
Good
Go
morning.
ahead.
There she is.
Hi. So yes, this is investment grade audit is it is more than just an energy audit. It actually will put together our conceptual plans for designing our perceived fixes. But this is essentially the first step in gathering all of the data to ensure that we are going down the right direction for the needs there at that building, primarily heating, cooling, and electrical needs. So that's what this is looking at. This is part of a larger construction project. This is the first step, which is why the amount is the 248, because it does also do all of our engineering and design on the construction project of the new HVAC and electrical.
So Savannah, in some of our projects, we have 10% engineering, varying percents. This $250,000 you estimate as being how much of the total cost?
We think about 4 to 5%. We'll have a better idea, of course, once the investment.
Savannah, was that 45 or 425?
4 to 5%,
Okay.
correct.
So it's going to be an expensive fix. And by doing this investment grade audit, those words are important, that then qualifies us to be eligible for, is it a federal grant for much of the costs?
Yes, so we're trying to get a lot of grants for this project, state and federal grants. One of the requirements we have to meet is through the Clean Buildings Performance requirements through the state of Washington. This will actually help us meet that as well. And then there's grant fundings attached to that to help pay for the cost of this audit.
So my hearing isn't good this morning. Did you say clean building or green building requirements?
Clean with a C.
Okay.
Um,
Green
There-
building is a whole different
You do not, no green,
development.
no green building, clean building. So, that's a state requirement, but this really, we started down this path not to meet a state requirement, but to address the significant maintenance needs that we have at the Hall of Justice with primarily, again, heating, cooling, and electrical. So normally, how a county would start moving down the road of trying to fix something is we would create a scope, we would go out to bid, we would, award to the low bidder. And sometimes that works out great. And in other times that there's more complex issues, as with, the Hall of Justice, we wanted to take a partnership with the Department of Enterprise Services and Millig in securing a project manager for this project, in securing engineers who specialize in HVAC and electrical and large-scale building upfittings. In the case of the Hall of Justice, the project has a really big scope, and so we wanted to ensure that we were really uploading our information and data and making the right decisions for the county.
So years ago, I remember when the Hall of Justice was first built, there was a considerable amount of boasting or bragging about an energy system that was based in part on geothermal action off of the vacant lot across the street. My sense is that technology is no longer effective and that's not going to be included in the upgrade. Or is this audit going to try to revamp that so it gets back to helping us heat and cool?
Great question. And you're correct. There is a geothermal unit located across from the Hall of Justice in that empty parcel next to the jail. And that is a component of what they're going to be looking at to see if that's viable to incorporate into a new heating cooling system. And if it's viable, what would the cost be to keep it up and running? And that'll help us bring to the board and the public, some good decision-making tools and saying, this is what it would cost, according to the engineer's estimate, to get this up and running, to create a 5-degree difference in the building. Is that cost effective for taxpayers? Or is the recommendation, if it's not cost effective, then we would go down with, there are other alternatives. But this would all come from this investment grade audit to help help with the decision-making on that front.
In my time of public service, I've come to recognize the importance of maintaining institutional knowledge about operations and how things are done and why things are done. But my sense is the institutional knowledge of operating and maintaining that system is long gone, and that one of the reasons it hasn't worked is because it hasn't been kept up, because people have moved on or retired and no longer working for the county.
Yes and no. The institutional knowledge that we've lost in the last decade has been, huge, and that's countywide, not just in maintenance. But I would also add that the project, the initial project design essentially failed after the first year or two because it was coming under the dike that's right there and pulling from the Cowlitz River. And what had happened was the pull and the diking system, it was no longer able to pull from the river. So instead of pulling from the river, we did the well system where it's currently located, and that became problematic. So the system design itself failed because of where we were drawing our water from. And then Army Corps of Engineers had some changes in what they allowed. So we had to pull back from pulling from the river at that time. So there's a lot going on there.
Again, one of the things I remember from the 80s were the complaints from the folks who worked at the Hall of Justice that with those huge plate glass windows, it made it virtually impossible to regulate. There was just too much heat loss through those windows. That was kind of a design flaw, they said, from the very, very beginning.
Yeah, that is actually one item that's on our to-do list in this proposal as well, is to look at of course, the heat loss of what types of materials are being used in that building.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So I appreciate your comment on institutional knowledge. Another typical approach we'd use is you've had lots of contractors and lots of people in over the recent years on a whole bunch of ideas and brainstorming to capture some thoughts. I'm hoping that you've captured that information to give and to incorporate it with this consultant, because we don't want to start from ground zero. You should have one whale of a lot of information all ready to lay on this consultant without creating new minefields and new ways to spend money. And again, when you're going to spend $250,000 on just a consultant report, what's your outlay and where's the county going to get the $250 million for the repairs?
So whole bunch of issues on there. In terms of the capture, it was, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, one of Mike Moss's initiatives with our support was essentially to capture the knowledge base in actual documents. Because prior to that, you're right, there's no accountability. So I think we're on the right track there. The other thing, there are at least two specific issues about the geothermal project. Back about maybe the late 70s or so, there's a big project off Hawaii called OTEC, Ocean Thermal Energy Conversion. And that's the same idea as we're going to go in, because off Hawaii, it gets deep really fast. And so the idea was to draw the 4 degrees Celsius water from depth and bring it up for cooling. Well, have you ever heard of that being in operation? Of course not. There's just a lot of problems, and I could talk about them, but I'm just very pessimistic that what was done back then spent $750K or more at a time that it should not have been spent, because there wasn't reasonable technical understanding. And that's a challenge we often have. The experts will sell you whatever it is you need that they tell you need. So this is caution for the upcoming board also. Be very careful. You really have to look at things. And then the other issue with this investment grade audit is, I think we have to do it or I wouldn't be approving it, but the Hall of Justice is still a problem, and we've been struggling with that for a long time, trying to decide now what our options are. This will help us decide, but can you imagine, this doesn't change the form factor or the allocation of the spaces in the Hall of Justice. We still have courtrooms and jury rooms that aren't going to be that useful. And use of space is also in question. This doesn't tackle any of that. And that may be something that drives it in the end. That is to say, drives whether the $250K materializes into a project at the Hall of Justice, because you take the 5% number that you got from Savannah, and that means 20 times, or it's a $5 million project or so, and you don't know what you have at the end. Do you have the building that you really want and can use? Or did you just make a poor allocation more palatable, buying you a little bit of time? I go through all this harangue because that's the kind of questions that we have to deal with. We're going to have to help decide that. And I'm thankful that we have folks in the public works services who really understand this stuff, or at least understand what the trade-offs have to be. I don't know why I'm stuttering so badly today. I guess I want to get out a lot in a short time.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, this is about another issue. This is on the contracts and bids and awards from 5 through 7. And I'm speaking as a farmer. And I agree, you know, we have to have the noxious weeds taken care of, but we have spent thousands of dollars on what they call tansy ragwort.
Could you
And-
put the microphone just a little bit closer to you?
Okay. We have spent thousands of dollars, maybe more, maybe, I don't know, for many, many years. So I have no idea how much it adds up to, but tansy ragwort has been a noxious weed for many years, and we've tried to control. How much have we succeeded? I guess what I'm trying to say is I agree to allocate money for this, but I'd like to have some sort of measurement of success that we've taken care of what we're putting money into. Like I say, I'm speaking as a farmer. We go out and clean our fields all the time. And I know that private fields are not taken care of. We should have regulations of some sort so that the people that are affected can have some success. I don't know what the county is, what their success rate is on spraying the roads and such, you know, maybe we could hear a little bit about, you know, what they have accomplished. But honestly, if you look at it, except for the climate, which is really a detriment to that particular plant, they haven't made any inroads taking care of it at all. And it's a real pain, to be honest. It's a real pain. I'd like to have some sort of answer. How much have you done? How much has the county done as far as controlling this?
So I know Jennifer's not here, so she's going to be the expert to give you that information.
She's online.
She's online, but I know that one of the challenges in solving the problem is the seeds keep coming in, particularly on trucks and logging trucks that have been the big carrier. So it's not that you can forever
I
end the
agree with that.
problem. It's a constant vigilance type of
But
thing.
you have just said the magic words, logging trucks.
Mhm.
And guess where they are? On private land. And guess how much control the county has over those particular people? The county has no control over Weyerhaeuser, Sierra Pacific, I could name a few others, Jorgensen. And yet they're spreading the seeds on the small farmers' pastures. That's just not right.
It may be my fatalistic Latin American background, but you have a lawn, you take care of it year in and year out, and you still have weeds. It takes effort. And a county is what, about 1,100 square miles? That's a lot of taking care of. And for the amount we spend on the noxious weed board, it's a hell of a bargain. Now, does it, and clearly, as you point out, it doesn't solve all the problems.
It's not solving the problems. I'm sorry.
Well,
You know, I guess
Jennifer
I'd like to
is
talk,
raising her
I'd like
hand.
to have.
Jennifer
I-
on at all?
Yep, she's
Yeah, she's
Yep,
on.
There she is.
Go ahead,
Jennifer, help us
All right.
out here.
I
would
need
you?
an answer.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. So I understand fully that tansy is a very prevalent species in our county. Two of the grants that we've received funding for are species that are not prevalent in our county as much as tansy. They're in very limited locations. And one of the challenges that we have with all noxious weed control is that seeds can be viable for many years. In the case of tansy, seeds are viable for 15 to 17 years in the soil. The grass species, false brome, which is a class A species that we're working with, the seeds are only viable for 1 to 2 years in the soil. And we've been working on this project for about 2 or 3 years now. The sites that we have done treatments for landowners and come back and treated a second year have been significantly less infested than the first year that we found those. We are working with Weyerhaeuser, who's doing their own treatments. Sierra Pacific, the DNR, they're all doing their own treatments for this species, which tends to spread in logging equipment, but also makes it into private lands through animal travel. So this Class A species that we're receiving funding for the idea with those species is to eradicate them so that they don't become a tansy ragwort in our county. We have an opportunity because they are in limited distribution. So those species are really important for us to help landowners control because of the opportunities that we have to stop them now. There are so many species on our list that are Class B species, which are more widespread. And the goal with those is not to eradicate, but to control the spread and reduce the infestations over time. So we really are working with a lot of landowners. I have a lot of data here at the office. If you'd like to stop by, I can go over some of our statistics with you. But we are making a lot of progress on all of the species. Again, climate is one of the factors, and this year we saw that with tansy. It's been a really healthy crop of tansy, unfortunately. But there are different things that our program offers for landowners who are battling that. So I would also encourage you to reach out to us. We have a cost share program. We have a disposal program. We can loan out backpack sprayers if that's what's needed. But we really are trying to educate folks on how to control those. A lot of people don't even know what it is that they have. And that's one of the reasons that we have a really thorough inspection program going and looking for things throughout our county, because we get new landowners all the time, folks who didn't grow up pulling tansy. We have a good population of folks who did and a good population of new folks. And our goal is to educate everyone on what they have, whether it be tansy or another noxious weed. There's probably 80 to 90 different species of noxious weeds here in our county. And I guess I would just end by saying one of the most difficult parts about noxious weed control is when folks are doing their job, you don't see the results of them controlling the species. So it's kind of that missing factor of if the job is done, you don't see it. But also we can't get everything. So a lot of our public works agencies that do rights of way treatment, whether it be the county or WSDOT or the cities, they are doing a lot of work. They are focusing on the higher priority species and getting to those more widespread species when they can. So it's not a perfect system, but we are doing the best to work with all of the public landowners and private landowners to make sure that they have the tools that they need to get the job done.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I do a lot of horseback riding. Well, not quite so much right now, but before.
Yeah.
And I have noticed a lot of tansy. And to be honest, they're basically primarily on the larger land owners' property.
Mhm.
And do you have any what do I say, punitive actions that you can take? Because they seem to be ignoring well, even if you go with the PUD line, I mean, it's yellow. The whole place is yellow. And you think, well, there can't possibly have been anything done in this area. And so do you have anything to go up to these landowners? Because they're huge. I know they have
Yeah.
millions of dollars. And so how do you combat that?
There are some steps that we can take. The biggest issue is that we only have 2 inspectors and we can't see everywhere. So
Just
if we
2.
receive reports from citizens like you that say, hey, up this power line or
Okay.
up in this area, there's some tansy, we can request to get out there, see the tansy and help that landowner get it under control. So the biggest barrier for us is that we can't see it, we can't help. If we don't know it's there and we can't be everywhere.
Okay, well, you might be hearing from us.
Excellent.
However-
I hope you do come over. We're just across the way.
Okay, thank
However, I thought you were asking a slightly different question. Your introduction was something like, please use your hammer to get these weeds under control. And you're asking Jennifer, what kind of hammer do you have when these big landowners don't do anything about their weeds? Is that right?
Well, if I can be part of that hammer by informing Jennifer, I would like to do that. And then I would really like to know what you can do to make it more pleasant for them to, abide by the rules.
So we've actually built some really good relationships with our large landowners and they're very responsive to our requests. So I typically don't have to use the hammer. In theory, though, the law states that our program has 2 options. We can send a notice of violation letter to the landowner, giving them 10 days to comply. And if they do not take significant action, we can either write a civil infraction ticket or do the control work and bill them for it.
I
If
like
we-
that.
So those are the two options that we have with the hammer. Our program prefers to take an educational approach. So as much as we can, we try to help those landowners understand where the problem is and how to control it, rather than enforce. But when landowners are purely non-compliant, that is an option for us.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that answer. Thank you.
And again, her office is in the annex building, right on the ground floor. So on your way out, just stop by and get her card so you have her phone number and stuff.
Thank you.
Regarding noxious weeds, I carry a little spray bottle on my four-wheeler when I'm out. It's amazing if you see a tansy come up or a weed come up and you get it right away. An ounce of prevention on those is worth 1,000% trying to chase them down later on. So that's part of the education process. And again, working with Bonneville and the PUDs to keep their spaces clean also. We pay for that. So the expectation. Back on this other one, the 248,000, two items. Number one, if you expect that the cost is going to exceed a certain portion of the value of that building, you've already stepped into a regulation where you've got to bring everything up to current code, seismic, electric, everything else, which ultimately almost defeats the purpose even to start with when you look at that potential cost. And that's why a lot of old buildings are being demolished, because there's no way that they can be brought up to current code anywhere near what their present value is. The second thing is I hope you have good experience with this MILIG organization that we're going to invest $250,000 into for a report.
If it's any help, the one of their, I think maybe she was a VP, came to speak to us, and I was impressed. I think the lady understood the issues. So that's the best I can do at the moment.
Plus they had a track record they could actually show us. So, you know, part of this building you can probably put on me a little bit. You know, they've kicked this down the road. This Hall of Justice has been a problem for a lot of years. And I come in and I sit on the committee and I said, I don't kick things down the road. We need to figure it out because it's never going to get cheaper. You can kick it down the road, but it's never going to get cheaper. So that was, when I was back in Washington, D.C., I talked to, places, how can we start looking at, because federal funds or some kind of help to do something with this building. And so that's where all this kind of bleeds from. This kind of assessment you need to have if you're going to get some funding from USDA or you're going to get some funding from the state or whatever to help with that. So it's part of the process. So if you want to blame anybody, it's probably me, because I said, I'm done kicking, I don't kick.
My key point, if you estimate that the total cost is going to exceed tremendously the value of the building when you upgrade seismic or grade, you're wasting all of the money even trying to go after it, because you'll never get there.
So several years ago, we had a couple of studies done on the facilities. And one of the conclusions both groups made that the bones of the Hall of Justice were fine. It's the extra stuff, the HVAC system and those things, electrical systems that needed to be upgraded. At the same time, we've constantly had complaints about the quality of place over there. And so it triggers, and this is the data that gets to what you're saying. At a certain point, are we better off just abandoning that site and building completely new? And if that is an option, could we do it more effectively, cost effectively from the taxpayer's point of view by arranging for a lease program on a current site? And I know Commissioner Mortensen has been very much interested in finding a new site that might cost us less in the long run. But we need this data first to make sure the trigger is provable.
My key point, the bones we go in there, the bones are good, my bones are good too. But if the cost that you're gonna put into by your own rules and regulations gets to a certain value, now you've not got to upgrade the bones, you got to replace the bones to current standards of seismic, electrical, HVAC, everything that totally puts it out of a price range. So that's, you gotta know what the ultimate is, and if it's gonna exceed, you're wasting all money right now, even going after it, because you can't get there.
You got a hand up, you said? So. Okay, any other comments? We do have, you did make a motion,
I did
correct?
make a
Yeah.
motion.
So we'll go call for a vote on the consent agenda. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Also an aye. Motion items. Health and Human Services show.
Did you say show?
Yeah, well, we said yesterday, we saved the best for last, right? So,
Oh,
Hey, good morning, Gina James, Health and Human Services. We have several items on the agenda today, all related to each other. So item 12 is a contract amendment with the Department of Social and Health Services, the Developmental Disabilities Administration in particular. So they've amended our fiscal year 24 contract and added funding for fiscal year 25. Items 13, 14, 15, and 16 are pass-through contracts with providers that provide the adult employment and day services related to this contract, the state amendments. We're passing funds down to those providers to provide those services. Item 17 is a portion of the funds we receive in that same contract for child development services. So we're passing those funds down to the Progress Center for the Child Development Services, which is birth to 3 years old. Just a couple items on these contracts. For the child development side, we talked briefly about this yesterday, and I've reached out and we're working with the Progress Center on some of the information that you had asked about in terms of the sort of the most common reasons why children get referred. So we're working on that piece.
Okay.
For the child development services.
Gina, I thought it was interesting. You did have some data for us that Progress Center works with about 340 kids. And 170 of them qualify for this state assistance.
Yeah, no,
So the rest of them are all funded through private insurance or families.
Right. So we're not the sole funder of their services, and they will bill insurance when they can and use that source. And this funding is sort of to fill in that gap so folks can still access the services. It is family-based, so if children get referred, they're working with the family when they do their evaluation and working on sort of a plan with the family. The family can choose to participate in, as many or as little as of the activities that are suggested.
The bulk of the money, though, goes to LifeWorks.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'm assuming they're serving the largest number of individuals with the developmental disabilities, trying to help them with either daycare support or employment support.
Right. So we have about 150 adults in our adult employment and day programs. That translates to 163 enrollments. So we have a handful that are enrolled in both employment and the day program at the same time. LifeWorks does serve the largest. They have 117 of those enrollments at LifeWorks. So they serve the largest group at their agency. The individuals, when they get referred or when they choose to participate in employment or the day service, their state case manager talks to them about which provider they want to work with. So the individual chooses which provider. That's what determines their caseloads and their budget essentially as well.
So Cowlitz County has no role in which of these agencies are on the list. The clients make the request.
The clients choose which provider they'd like to work with. We do have a role in determining if a provider meets the state's qualifications to be considered a qualified provider. So there's certain pieces that agencies have to have in place to be in order to be considered a provider for these services. So we do have a role in that particular piece, but the client chooses which provider they want to work with.
If I look at just use LifeWorks, that's about $10,000 per person. And most of those people are probably collecting other support from the government.
They may be accessing other benefits through the state.
Yeah, I know they may be, but I'm saying typically I would expect that they're collecting certainly other support. I'm curious what the total sum of support is because, and this is, I'm not trying to pick specifically on LifeWorks or even on this program because I think this program in general has an objective that I understand.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking back to the homeless in Seattle. They were spending $100,000 a year per homeless, and that seemed terribly egregious to me. And I know here in the county, $50,000 a year salary is pretty substantial. Yet many of the programs I see, we're spending more than $50,000 on the individual. So if you ever can get for us an all-in cost, and it's going to be statistical, I understand. So the way I would do that is if I have 117 people, I'd try and get, and I don't know you can, get all the money that the government spends in there at every level and just sum that up to the 1.3 and divide that by 117.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I might reach out. I don't know if the state looks at any of that type of data. They might have something around that.
Well, yeah, it's unfortunate you know everything about his finances and his and mine and all that, but we can't get the most basic information of this kind, which seems like, how do we know we're not violating the gifting clause or misspending the money? Anyhow.
So Commissioner Mortensen mentioned an average of $10,000 a year in benefits.
Mm-hmm.
No,
But
in cost. I don't know about the benefits.
The individual with disabilities doesn't get any of that money. That goes to the agency.
Correct. It pays.
That agency
Mhm.
gets paid at a rate that always takes into account all the other requirements for employees, because they're the ones that are getting the paycheck. The disabled person is getting a paycheck for whatever job from that employer that their coach and their advocate is working with them on. So, yeah, that $10,000 incorporates annual pay rates, annual pay increases, and it's certainly not minimum wage, but it's certainly, they tend to be more highly paid.
Yep, that's accurate. Mhm.
However, if their income level goes 1 penny over the minimum amount, they lose all support, right?
For benefit, there's a lot of benefit analysis that takes place. And one of the things that for the employment program in particular, it's something that is watched closely because we don't want that to discourage individuals from being employed or getting another job or working more hours. And so there's ways to help balance that out. The state's really good at working with us on that.
Okay. Any other questions?
Well,
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, Gina.
Hi.
You mentioned that there's qualifications that these programs, the people that are involved in it have to meet in order to receive the funding.
Mhm.
Do we have any qualifications, if you will, or do we have anything on the back end to make sure that they're accomplishing whatever their objective is after receiving the funds? You know what I mean? Like at the end of the year, do we go back and evaluate those programs and what they're doing?
Yeah, so we evaluate the agencies annually, and that's on the quality and to be a qualified provider. So we review all of that annually to make sure that they continue to meet those qualifications to be a provider. We also look at different aspects of the program. So it gets a little bit tricky because when we're working with individuals with a developmental disability, there's a lot that's centered around client choice. And so, if someone chooses to switch jobs, right, then that counts as a job loss. And then we're looking for a new job for, helping someone find a new job. It's an individual choice. You or I might choose to look for different work as well. So when we look at data, we have to really look at what the situations were around that. We do look at the percent employed. And so, each agency and as a whole, we have a number of clients in the employment program. So like we have 67 enrollments in the employment program in particular. Right now, we're at 75% employed, which is the highest actually it's been in a long time, especially through COVID. It was took a big dive for a lot of different reasons. And so we do look at that number of percent employed, but like I said, we're always looking at the situations. We also, when we do our annual reviews to make sure they continue to be qualified providers, we're looking at specific cases and looking at how the agency is working with the individuals on their plans. They have employment plans. And so they're always looking at, are you meeting the goals that you set in your plan? If you didn't, why not? Or how did you readdress it or rework it so that you're making some progress with the individual? So it gets tricky, but yes, we do look at some of those performance measures.
And does an institution like LifeWorks, do they have like an active recruiting program to go and gain more employers so that you don't have the same employers, they can only employ so many people? Are they actively bringing on new businesses?
So they are always looking to build all the agencies to build relationships with employers. Individuals sometimes apply for just, general jobs that are posted that we all would see. Other times businesses customize jobs for individuals based on different skill sets and abilities. So they're always looking for new connections and staying in contact and building those relationships with business owners.
Thank you.
I think why LifeWorks has gotten to the size it is, it operates Farm Dog Bakery, and a lot of the individuals work through that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So question that's a simple yes or no answer. Do we return any of the money at the end of whatever the contract time is?
We historically have funds that are unspent, yes.
Okay.
And
thank you.
as you've noticed, if you did math on the amendment and then the allocations to providers, there's about 680,000 that's unallocated. And we do that each year intentionally. Partly a portion of that does pay for our time, but we also want to be looking at the services throughout the year and how they're provided, and knowing that client hours can go up and down and they may switch agencies throughout the year. So we often keep funds unallocated so that we can account for that throughout the year.
Okay, and then, thank you.
Mhm.
This program should largely be economy independent, shouldn't it? That is to say, I'm either disabled or I'm not. Doesn't matter what's happening around me. So I would expect that if we look at the data over the years, we should see pretty much some trend that's independent of the status of the economy.
in terms of the individuals participating in these programs?
Well, because we return funds,
Mhm.
typically they're unspent, that tells me that we are satisfying everybody who is disabled. Oh, maybe I'm wrong there. Everybody who is disabled and qualifies today gets attention. And as the economy goes down, the number of disabled don't necessarily go up,
Mhm.
but the income of the disabled may go down. So I'll take back what I was saying. I apologize. Um,
So I'm looking at this and I'm seeing in my kind of engineering Excel spreadsheet format, a fantastic opportunity at the end of the year to have a display of what was the results of all of these programs, meaning I think everyone is some way or another employing disability of some sort.
Mhm.
So that's the ultimate of all of these. And so that employment has certain requirements to go with it. And then there's certain statistics that can be available. How long was the person employed? What's their history? What was their average wage or whatever? Do we get any of that data? Do the commissioners get any of that data at the end of the year? Is that what was the average pay? What was the average length? How many of these people have been on these programs working continuously, one or another, for a period of time? This is almost $2 million worth of employing disabled or disabilities, correct?
Yeah, we do have some of that information. We don't have a fancy software system to pull reports, so it is a manual check.
It doesn't have to be manual. If you set it up with a report that they turned in our magnificent computers these days, you move it without names or anything into a spreadsheet that just gives averages and information data. But you got to set the program up with the matrix and the expectation in the first place.
Yeah, we
The
do.
contract.
Yeah, we do have some of that information, and we have
I don't
presented.
want some. I want it all in a good format. If I was sitting up there, I'd be demanding it.
Sure. Yeah. I'm happy to pull that together for what we have for last year. We have presented in the past some of that information for the commissioners. We can pull that together again.
At this point, people listening might think that we draw conclusions only based on the dollar amount. This kind of program has an intangible. You do good for the society if somebody has a job, because it gives us individually a purpose. And so it's not like we get down to the line and say, well, we would lose $1 an hour, so we're not going to do it. No, that's not. But you really must understand where things go so that you can address whatever the salient problem is. And if you don't have any metrics, you don't know what the salient problem is.
And year after year, if you get it started, you see, I'm making a little bit of progress, or I'm employing these amount of people, spending our county money and doing this good. And we're getting better at it, or that's dropped off for some reason. Why? So that you have a basis for asking sound, good questions.
So maybe it's time for a motion.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, I will repeat an admonition that the more we depend on grants, the more our destiny, our present and our future, is out of our control. And there is a danger in this development that we've had over the years where we depend more and more on the government for these things. So I'm going to go ahead and make the motion that we approve the contract amendment as has been discussed. But understand that it's, as I've said, I don't need to repeat it.
Okay. So we have a motion to approve the contract amendment as discussed in item 12. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, call for a vote. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Also vote aye.
So
How do you want to take the others?
I-
13 through 16 are all just,
I would like to make a motion to do the 13 through 16. These are the folks who are providing employment and day services for the developmentally disabled. I would move that we approve the contracts with the various providers of services for developmental disability, employment, and day services for LifeWorks, for Compass Career Solutions, for Goodwill of the Olympics and the Rainier region, and Employers Overload, as described by staff.
okay. So we have a motion to approve basically the provider of the services, which would be items 13, 14, 15, 16, LifeWorks, Compass Career, Goodwill, and Employees Overload. Questions, comments?
The thing that I wanted to mention is that we are witnessing a rebuilding of the program. We saw devastation, like, as you
Mhm.
mentioned, during the COVID, and it does take time to build the programs back up. It seems to me we've added a couple of providers since pre-COVID years, which is good. And I think we've also lost some providers that have gone out of business or,
Mhm.
and might have changed. So we do monitor those things. And I do remember that we have had presentations from both the providers of the services as well as employers who have come in and given examples. Of course, we run into HIPAA rules and regulation on how much information about the person's disability that we can do in a public setting. But it's going to be timely next spring, probably, to do another one of those kinds of assessments to look at that, along with maybe some of the more numbers that Ron said we should be looking at.
I just wanted to make the comment that I appreciate the fine line that you gentlemen are walking, because you do have to be accountable for the funds and the way that they're spent to the taxpayer. But there are programs, and I think this is one of them. The people that are participating in it and the providers that I don't want to say we have a responsibility, but I think it's to the betterment of our community when we get involved in those types of programs. And as Commissioner Mortensen said that we help that individual gain some self-worth. I had the opportunity years ago to work with LifeWorks, and we had a Special Olympics with our youth group at church. And we had it at the park right there at the soccer fields next to Kaiser. And they brought their clients there, and we had different little events that they were able to participate in and activities that they could do. And from that, I know from that event specifically that there were youth that were involved in helping those people that worked with that were clients of LifeWorks that got involved in that field, and that their hearts were touched such that they wanted to make a difference within the handicapped and disabled community. So I think that there are things that we should invest in that have intangible benefits that we may not be able to measure. The things that we can measure, I think, are important that we do, but making a difference in people's lives, whether they're disabled or not, is a responsibility that I feel that we all have as citizens. And so you guys walking the line that you walk, having to make the decisions that you do, I appreciate it. And I'm thankful that you make the comments that you make about being fiscally responsible and making sure that we're not reliant upon grants all the time, because that is a dead end road. But giving people the opportunity to be involved in these types of programs will also help expand those, hopefully in the future, to where there's going to be less grant money needed as those programs grow and expand, as you said, Commissioner Dahl, about the bakery. So I think we do have a responsibility to delve into worthy causes that make a difference within our community. And as long as we have metrics to determine and measure those differences, I think they're worthwhile.
Yeah. I wouldn't really disagree with anything you said. I think you, and I totally agree with Ron. I think you need the metrics because anytime you're dealing with public money, and I do agree that this is, has some public good to it. I've been blessed to see a young man grow up and take part of this. And I know what kind of, difference it makes for him. So I believe that, but it's just not at any cost, right? You still have to walk that fiscal line.
Yep.
So I also want to remind folks that Goodwill also provides jobs as well as the coaching. So both LifeWorks and Goodwill are employers as well as providing services.
Although I struggle with Goodwill a little bit.
So just to maybe press a little bit, not that it's really necessary. The Olympics were in France, and so were the Paralympics. And I actually got to see, I spent some time on TV. I know I spent too much time on TV, but the Paralympics were really very interesting. Watching people swim when they have no arms is rather interesting, and you've got to doff your hat, and you know that lifts all of us. Wheelchair basketball, I didn't think that was possible, but it is. It's something. I encourage people to take a look at that.
And there is an event here locally in the spring that's been happening the past couple of years, a track meet that's put on where individuals with disabilities are invited to participate in a track meet. So they get to try different events and do different things. And so that's a pretty neat event to have locally.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. I'm not seeing any other hands or anything, so call for the vote. Once again, this is for items 13, 14, 15, and 16. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Also vote aye. Item 17. Yeah. I'll just be honest with you. I try to call around and try to figure out, I know they serve the younger kids, but I don't know what the results are, how it works out, and it's hard for me to get an answer. So me personally, I'd like to see some of the information that they're bringing back before I do that, but that's just me personally.
So that would require us to find out what the timing is on this. By when do you need a decision?
So there, as I mentioned earlier, the agency has a couple different funding sources that they use. So this fund source would not be able to be billed until a contract is approved. So they may be able to utilize other sources of funds in the meantime. In terms of our timeline, we don't have necessarily a hard timeline. It's just that matter of them being able to bill for the services.
Do you have a sense for how much, how difficult life would be if they didn't get funding, if we didn't decide this until, well, let me back up. The contract they currently have expires when?
It expired in June, the end of June.
Okay, so they've been without funding from us since then.
For July and August.
Okay. Because they will get, I was thinking of making the decision in January when the new commissioners can weigh in there. I'm not sure that's important, but that's just a thought. Then the other thing is, I get very antsy when it deals with children, and if this were an independent, this were a private agency, I would have more confidence because they would have clients only if people thought they were getting some value out of it. In this case, I know they've got to operate under all kinds of regulations from the government. And I think the government does a very poor job on our children. So I'm challenged here.
That's what gives me the angst. And so I was hoping that they'd be able to provide a little bit and give me some comfort that the kids are actually getting some benefit out of this.
Yeah, so I'm happy to bring some information back. I know what we talked about yesterday was sort of the common conditions or reasons that children get referred. So that's what we've reached out about so far, but we can also ask about.
I mean, if they've helped these kids from 0 to 3 and they should be able to tell you if they've caught up and now they're working well in the school or
Okay.
there should be some improvement that you can identify.
I
'Cause
can't,
I hate to say it, but I like Commissioner Mortensen, the government's got their hands in there and I see the things that they tell people they're supposed to teach and some of it actually makes me ill.
I can answer that question. If you like. My son and daughter-in-law have adopted babies that,
It would really help me if you
okay,
made
that
sure
were
thank you.
affected by their birth mother's drug usage, okay? And they were sent to the Progress Center. And I can verify that these people, they do an tremendously great job of monitoring the effect that the drugs have had on the baby. They give them nutritional value, information, they give them medication if they need it. And we right now have more drug babies than what we really know about. And they take them in and try to get them to be normal. It's a long process. Sometimes it doesn't work, but they do a tremendous job. And this is the most important years of their life from birth. If you don't get them at this point in time, a person is what they are at 5 years of age. So between birth and 3, it's very, very important. Their growth, their intellectual growth as well as their physical growth. And I can tell you with like I said, we've gone through that and we know what they do for them and it is very good. They really are a big help. Just like,
With, you may have already violated HIPAA of some kind.
Oh, I did? Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, so my question is, can you violate it even a little more? Telling me a little bit about the sort of high level nature of the issue. And then can you tell me, was this under, did your relatives, did they pay? Or was this
I
something?
believe there was some monetary, I don't know if it's insurance or whatever they paid, but I do know that the little boy that they have, his skull was actually shoved in and they have a special helmet. It is now perfectly round. His intelligence is great. He's still a drug affected. And that's the sad part. There's only so much you can do with some of the situations. However, what they did for him and at the very beginning, because when Todd and Tammy got them, he was basically a lump of coal, just nothing. I mean, he didn't move, it was just nothing. And they gave him physical therapy guidelines and what to do with him and how to feed him. Like I say, they did the helmet, they got the skull back where it's supposed to be. I really honestly think that they're wonderful.
So how much, it seems like a lot of what, I'm trying to figure out how to present the question. A lot of what I hear is something that certainly many of us would just go to the internet and just say, what's the recommended procedure for this and that? And so the question is, they're educating the mom and dad,
Yes.
and that's a one-shot thing, or is this like?
No, they went several months and, well, actually, first 2 years, I think, of both of the children's lives, until they got to a point where they felt that they were okay and they didn't have to monitor their actions and their growth anymore. Like I said, that the little boy had at first no growth. I mean, he was affected, and they said, okay, this is what is normal with the drug usage. This is how, with the parents, this is how you handle this. So the parent knows what. I mean, when you get a drug-affected baby, you don't know. I mean, you've not had a drug-affected baby. You don't know what's normal for them to go through. And so they're doing these different things that your alarm system goes crazy because this is not what a normal child does. You go in there and they go, okay, well, you're going to experience this and this. And so when you do experience it, you're getting, okay, this is what I was told, and this is what I do for it, and this is what I can do. I mean, like when he was born, like I said, the whole side of his head was shoved in. Okay, well, that happens. So I had a little helmet, and it blossomed just perfect. But at first, I would have been just horrified, like, what do you do? But they handle these things, and they tell the parents how to handle them. And I think the education part is well worth it because, like I said, not only do they treat the child, but they educate the parent on how to treat the child. They just don't go, okay, you're done. They educate them so that they can go on with the child and they know what's going to come ahead.
So you mentioned the birth mother had drug usage
Yes.
problem. Is that the mother they're working with, or is
No.
it the adopted parent?
No,
She's not, it's not a drug therapy for her.
no, it's
It's a
not.
parenting training for
For the
adopted
adopted parents.
Okay.
Right, because that would be the long term.
Yep.
And
Well, this is all very consistent with virtually all the information that I've ever heard about for Progress Center. I think it is absolutely essential, especially with new commissioners coming on, that they have a presentation on the purposes of the program, what it does, what its limitation, so we can be ensured that some of the indoctrination ideas that we hear about other educational programs isn't applied in this case. I think 1 to 3, you're not going to get into too much of that so-called indoctrination, because you're talking about really basically helping those kids to get prepared. And then letting us know, again, the long-term effects. How are they able to take advantage of the programs in the public schools? I mean, they all become part of the special ed program with IEPs and a whole separate program of parallel education with assistance as well as attending regular classes. So, we've had that in the past, but it's been a while. So I think it's only fair to remind commissioners, to educate the commissioners on the programs. Again, I don't have a problem with making the motion to go ahead and approve the contract, provided that we do have that education follow-up particularly with the new commissioners. But
So this contract is a cancelable contract, right? All our contracts should always say it with some 90-day clause or something.
Yes.
Okay. So the new commissioners would then have an opportunity to say, we didn't like what we saw.
Okay. Do you want to turn that into a motion, Commissioner Weber?
sure, is that okay? Okay.
Yeah.
I would make the motion to approve the contract with Progress Center to provide funding for the delivery of child developmental services to children from birth to 3 years of age, as described by staff.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor. Any other questions or comments?
And with the assurance of staff that they will go forward with an educational program.
Yeah,
next year.
I totally agree. We've had workshops with others and I find them very helpful, and I think whoever sits in these seats come January, it would be helpful for them.
Sure,
So I would
absolutely. Yeah.
strongly encourage that too.
Yep.
Hey, see no others. We'll call for a vote. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Also vote aye. Thank you, Gina.
Okay, thank you.
Because we've talked about some of this today, it brought up, I just wanted to clarify something, and I heard it. They're having these series of debates, and they had a debate last Wednesday, and one of the questions was around why did the county give away 800,000? Why did they send 800,000 or something back to the state? And it was on a program that runs through HHS. And so I thought I would explain that a little bit. We will get funds from the state, and they will say, and you can correct me if I say anything wrong here. In this particular one, they will say, you can use this for, let's say, A, B, and C. If you fulfill all A, B, and C by the end of the year and you have funds that are left over, then it has to come back to us and gets put back in the reallocation for next year. It's not that we send it back. It's that it's part of the contract that it goes back. And on this particular one, we had not spent very much. And I think close to 800,000 went back. And I can recall Commissioner Mortensen asking Gina to look in, what are other counties doing? Or is there something we're missing? So I just found the question kind of misleading, like we're just shipping money back because we don't want to spend it. And that's totally not the case. We spent it per the guidelines, and then we sent back what we didn't spend per the guidelines.
So there's a couple comments. That does happen with a lot of our contracts in our department, that we receive X amount of funding and we don't end up spending all of it. So at the end of the year, we reconcile. We either leave some unspent or we send it back to the state. I believe what that 800,000 is in regards to the foundational public health services funding. So that's the funding that we've been talking to the Board of Health for with the priorities. So that particular funding has had increased significantly in the last couple of years. And it's just been a process working with both, the county commissioners and now our new Board of Health to look at what our priority areas are as a county and where we want to direct some of that funding. So we did early on, when we first received the larger sum of funding, had worked with the board and did find some ways to spend some of the funding. Other ideas weren't supported at that time. And so we continue to have these conversations, which did mean that we returned a pretty large sum to the state. But we continue to have the conversations with the Board of Health. And actually should be on the agenda for next week's Board of Health. Is it next week or the week after? Board of Health meeting in September to continue to talk about what the county's priority areas may be, and if we want to utilize some of that funding to support increased efforts in certain health areas.
I don't think anybody on the Board of Health wants to just spend it to spend it. I think it wanted to do something.
Right.
I mean,
think
that was the gist I got.
Yeah. This has been a long, thoughtful process.
Yeah, implicitly, I was at a meeting where that came up, and it's implicitly the job of the commissioners isn't to spend money. It's basically to help solve problems that are real, not self-inflicted problems. And in doing so, it may seem easy that, well, you just give money and money will solve problems. There's plenty of evidence money doesn't solve problems. It facilitates some solutions of some kinds, but it can be very much a negative factor. Lots of people have been destroyed by a lot of money. And we don't want to be an instrument of that. And anyhow, that's all I wanted to interrupt about.
So I'm wondering, would it be fair to say that best efforts are made to take advantage of those monies that are available to us, and occasionally we just don't spend it all? I mean, it's just that easy.
And that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the nice thing about this is I like to trust people. I'd like to be trusted. Arn, here's a chunk of money. Your job is to provide a safety net, not a convenience net. And I like that I get extra dollars available because they trust our judgment. That's a good thing. If we return it, clearly it's trust placed adequately, at least.
And it's really not that uncommon in a lot of the programs that we just talked about some here. If you see the total that they're gonna send us, what we're spending doesn't add up, right? We just had that conversation. So it's not uncommon that we don't spend everything the government that gets allocated down here. It's based on the need. When the need's satisfied, the rest goes back. I mean,
So based on the earlier comment about finding out, do other counties typically spend every dollar, or do they send some of it back?
You know, each county is very different. So there are some counties that spend every penny, and there are some counties that return funding. It really just varies depending on the county.
So did we fall on the side of the minority group that sent money back?
Probably, yes. I
Okay,
would say so.
good for us.
okay, it is open to public comment. Got a short crowd today. Not seeing any. Remember at 1:30 today, if you have interest in seeing as we start the budget review for 2025, that'll start today, 1:30 in this room. See nothing else unless you gentlemen have something quick.
So several weeks ago, I mentioned the State Association of Counties board meeting this week. Tomorrow afternoon, the meetings start with a meeting of the Timber Counties Caucus. That'll run from 1 o'clock until about 5 o'clock. Hearing reports for the harvest rules being proposed for state-owned DNR lands, which are designed to generate revenues for some counties as well as educational institutions and the state as a whole. We're also reviewing the latest development from the federal Forest Service on the management of the national forests, which is again much more controversial. They used to harvest a lot. Now they don't harvest very much at all, and that does pose some unique problems for counties that have a lot of public lands that they can't generate. They don't get to generate much in the way of timber tax revenue because, you know, particularly if it's federal, they're not harvesting a whole lot. So that's going to be some interesting updates on the issues of interest to us. Cowlitz County actually owns about 11,000 acres of farmland that we obtained through foreclosure in the late 1930s and the Great Depression. And rather than manage it ourselves, we have an arrangement with the the Department of Natural Resources. They manage it for us. So not only do we get revenues from timber tax, we also get revenues from the sale of the timber that's harvested from those 10,000 acres. A bunch of it is in the Riderwood area. A bunch of it is right on the edge of the border with Wahkiakum County. And a small amount of it is down near Yale. Interesting. So we have an interest in paying attention to what DNR comes up with. Interestingly, DNR is always, they charge us a management fee. So if there's, $1 million being generated by the sale of logs that Cowlitz County owns, they charge us 26%. And they're proposing adding to that an extra 2% to 28%. I think I have those numbers correct. What's interesting is that the overhead costs for large companies like Weyerhaeuser is about 14% goes into the management. And it's kind of, it's always interesting that the state is, not surprising, the state is charges a higher fee to manage forests. So anyway, we're going to a meeting tomorrow afternoon. I won't be able to be in the afternoon meeting because I'll be at that timber caucus meeting.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Does the state have the right? I know it's private private land, it's owned, and they're growing a crop, and so they should be able to harvest that crop just like any farmer. However, lately, in the last 3 years, there's been a tremendous amount of logging, all my trails, actually, every one of them practically, which I'm a little steamed about. I mean, isn't there a limit to, I mean, I know it's private property, but isn't there some sort of a limit that the state has for harvesting trees? And is there an enforcement on that limit?
So as you can appreciate, there's multiple answers to that. I'm not an expert, so I'll give you my best guess. And if there's others that have more expertise in that, it's different. The state has very little regulation of harvests on federal lands. They do their own thing. So they have to follow environmental rules and regulations, just like everybody has to. So the federal, we've got a chunk of the Gifford in our county.
Yeah.
And a big chunk of that is inside a national monument. So there's no harvesting going on. Of course, it's also an active volcano, so that makes it a little bit difficult. The state has another big, I think between the feds and the state, there's about a third of Cowlitz County that's publicly owned. So the state has a job of generating revenue for school construction particularly. That dates all the way back to the original territorial days when Section 16 in every township was set aside for the states to utilize for timber production. So all of the state acreage has a harvest and management plan. So they anticipate when the forests are mature. So it wouldn't be surprising that there's a maturity that happens about the same stage because, they were clear cut at one time. And so it's going back. Then the privately owned forest lands qualify for a special tax category, assuming that they manage according to their plan. Again, the state reviews and, certain environmental rules and regulations. You can't harvest so close to streams, for example. And so a lot of rules and regulations that have to be followed. So, and then we have the private, the small tree farmers, and they've got programs as well. So I wish it were a simple answer, but it's complicated.
I know. Well, the reason I bring up this question is that years ago, and I do understand that, the tax goes to the schools and that's a good plan. However, over the years, before, let's see, like 95, of course, I'm a lot older than you, so going back a bit, where I would ride at my horses and things, and we knew that there was a certain percentage of the trees were going to be cut down. It never affected us that much. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but they're logging exponentially. It is acres and acres and acres behind our place, and it's like the last 3-4 years, so much more than in the past. That it's
so. Earlier today, you mentioned a company, Sierra Pacific.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
are they the neighbors that are doing this major harvesting?
They own a lot of my trails I ride on, and Weyerhaeuser as well, but they're doing a huge amount of logging. And if you look around in the hills, as you drive down the freeway, you can see these patches.
Yeah.
And that's only a very, very minute part of how much they're logging. So my thing is like, isn't there a limit to have this. I mean, you've got to have a limit. And I know it's a private property, but I mean, just for an example, I do know that they are taxed less than the smaller private homeowner and stuff for their land. I mean, it's a timber. We had it on our farm for a while and we had 40 acres, but not now, of course. So their tax is less. And because of that, the public was allowed access, okay? Now, I have to pay $125 for one permit, which is just a small little area. If I want to ride in another part of the area, I've got to pay, this is Weyerhaeuser, another $125. Just to
So
get
each
in the ga-
company charges access fees?
That's access fee, and that's just Weyerhaeuser. Sierra Pacific, not quite so much, and they haven't. But what I'm saying is they probably will, and yet they're still paying a lesser of the taxes. But my problem is, and Sierra Pacific is now just wiping out. I just can't even tell you how many acres. There's that many. If you're around Castle Rock and you go on freeway past Castle Rock, just look around the hills, even from the freeway, you can see there's got to be some limit. Is there not some limit imposed on these companies that they can only do a certain percentage every year?
So the reason I it sounds like I'm trying to evade the question. I'm not. Again, I'm not an expert, but Sierra Pacific bought that tract of land from International Paper.
Right.
International Paper bought that land from Long Bell. So that was part of what they're harvesting in massive amounts was all cut down in the 1920s, 30s, 40s by Long Bell. So it would make sense that becomes mature. And I don't know whether this is the third growth or second growth, but whatever. It wouldn't be surprising that
Oh.
there's an awful lot that's being harvested now. The key thing is that there has to be environmental rules and regulations
Well,
with watersheds.
I-
But I don't think the state can say, no, you can't harvest.
Well, how about just a certain percentage? Because they used to do that. A certain percentage was harvested every year. So you couldn't do plots that were together. You had to have them separated by a certain amount of land. But now it's all running together.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, it's incredible how much they're harvesting. And I'm sorry to get so cranky about it, but I think there should be
It changes your quality of life, isn't it?
tremendously.
Yeah.
I mean,
But it did give me a view of Mount Rainier, Mount St. Helens, and on
Well,
a
I'm
clear day,
sorry.
the top of Mount Adams.
well, I'm glad for your view. However, it's just, I mean, these trails, it took me years to get these trails together, but it's just the amount of trees being harvested in 1 year. Where before when we did fund the schools, because that was part of my husband's, he was on the school board and was all involved with that as well. And the funding it for the school. So I know that, but we did it with fewer trees being harvested.
So you did mention Weyerhaeuser, and again, a distinct memory when I was a kid growing up here was Weyerhaeuser advertised sustained yield, certain amount every year. So it would be constantly going. So that tells me that that's a private company business decision. Sierra Pacific has to pay off those investors and they've got to harvest the land. So
They
you know,
almost
they're
want their
making,
money
they
now.
may be making different decisions on how much they harvest.
I suppose so, but I really think that, I don't know, there should be some limits because it's in some areas, it's actually changing the environment around it tremendously. The wind has come through our valleys. It's a lot harder to some of our homes and things. I don't know. Like I said, I just wanted to know.
As you probably already know, Long Bell bought the lumber from Weyerhaeuser in about 1919, 1920. Weyerhaeuser actually acquired it from the Northern Pacific Railroad in alternating sections. That was originally land grant called, and they bought it in 1900. So in those first 20 years, Weyerhaeuser had to consolidate. They did a lot of consolidation, so they didn't have the alternating.
Mhm.
And in 1912 or 13, we had a dramatic, significant global warming problem in Southwest Washington. It was called the Yakult burn. And it burned
Oh, yeah.
everything from Yakult down to Washougal. And it was mostly Weyerhaeuser property. And so at the time, Longview was being put together with the tract that Long Bell bought, which was on the Lewis, up north of where you live.
Mm.
Weyerhaeuser is trying to salvage whatever they could from the Yakult burn. And they kind of ignored us. They said, go ahead and develop. And then in the late 20s, they said, okay, it's time for us to harvest the St. Helens, mostly on the other side of the river. It's been interesting.
Yeah, I understand how when they acquire land and they try to manage it and everything. I just wanted to see them think about the public a little bit more. I'm sorry.
So as more pertinent, you will not be at the meeting
Wednesday.
Tomorrow.
tomorrow. Okay. And then there was one other thing. Later on today, there's a Veterans Advisory Board.
I have that on my
You're going.
calendar. Yeah.
Okay.
So a couple of positives on following up on Flo's comment. Number one, private enterprise. The sales, the county got money out of those sales, correct? That was good. Secondly, private enterprise, they're going to be responsible, and probably in 5 years, you're going to see really nice young green forests growing there again, because they have a responsibility to their shareholders for getting something going back on that ground, which is much more aggressive than our public grounds are taken care of in this state, no matter who owns them. So
Yeah, they've
with
already
one
replanted my whole hillside.
with one caveat, and Wahkiakum County has suffered from this caveat. You can get investors who buy mature stands and harvest them and then sell and move on. And they don't necessarily, they have a different attitude on long-term and sustained yield. The larger companies that, we depend upon do a better job of that sustained yield and
Yeah.
replanting.
When I first had my property, all the way up to it, you're pretty much under a tree canopy. And then they did a first harvest, and I can't even remember how many years ago, but replanted, and those trees are probably 12, 14 feet tall now, the new ones. And then 2 years ago, they did the other side of my hill that gave me all the view, and those are, about like, yay. So they're all coming. You can see them coming.
correct. And for wildlife, the young forest and young ground is so much more accommodating other than the old growths, et cetera. So there's good benefits on that. So my real question is, what is good for the county citizens, for the county to have their own ground rather than moving it into private enterprise? Why should we as a county even have any forest ground?
That's a great question, and I'd like to ask it in a different way, but it's where I'm heading. The property that we own that's in this reserve sort,
Yeah.
what capability do we have for using it? Can we sell it? Can we put it up for sale?
So when my understanding is when it was foreclosed upon back in the 30s, and the decision was made to allow the Department of Natural Resources to manage it for us, it was placed into a trust. So it's a timber trust, county timber trust lands. There's about 13 or 14 counties that have a similar type of arrangement with DNR. Interestingly, Grays Harbor didn't make that choice. They hired their own forester, and they've been managing it on their own. They have the right to sell it. But when we establish the arrangement with the DNR, it becomes a trust, and the law only provides one exception to get it out of that trust, and that is if it's going to be used for park or park purposes. We can reconvey it back to our ownership. not private ownership. So again, decision made, you know, in the 1930s by those commissioners, kind of said, we're going to keep that and keep the money coming into the county. And
And that's why we as commissioners have to be very careful about these long-term commitments. And we always need an escape clause. Clearly, we don't have one here.
now we actually do own some other timberland. It is in the area of the landfill that has not been developed yet. I think if you've been in some of the discussions, the landfill is designed to have 22 cells. It's big chunks of land that they put the garbage in. We are finished up or getting ready to finish up with cell number 10. So we're halfway through the development. When we get to all 22 cells, we go back around a second time, and that gets us the long-term storage capabilities. But the agreement we made with Weyerhaeuser when the county bought was that Weyerhaeuser had the first right to harvest the trees off of the land. They claim to have sold it to us at a discount so that they can get the fair value by harvesting the trees. So as we develop each of those cells, Weyerhaeuser comes in and logs off that top.
So let me challenge this discussion on trusts. Family enterprises and estates have trusts because they're trying to shield themselves from taxes or reduce their taxes. Okay, that's private and that's et cetera. When you say we, it's we that own this property. You are our caretaker of this property with the DNR. So I don't believe that this trust has validity in representing the common estate of all of us and the good of Cowlitz County citizens. So I challenge the perspective in a legalistic perspective that I don't see founding or base in that discussion. I'm just wanting you to question that.
Yeah. There is a specific state law that sets up these trusts that we, you know, the legal trust that the DNR has.
In our lawfare state right now, we see only the laws being enforced when somebody wants something.
Yeah. Laws can be changed.
Okay. Anything else? Thanks for the conversation today. Thanks for attending and being part of the meeting. We will adjourn. You got a hand up? Who's up? Sorry. I didn't see it. Dave, you had a hand up?
Morning, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So yeah, I just wanted to tap in on that conversation about timberlands again. I have lived in Doodle for over 20 years at this point. My parents over 30. And I would just point out that north of Castle Rock, there are a couple of parcels adjacent to the highway, 504. Couple 40-acre parcels. One of them north of 504 was logged, 3 or 4 years ago. One south of it was logged probably 1 or 2 years ago. That 40-acre parcel north of 504, it is adjacent to it. I noticed at one point when I was back down in Toole, I work in Olympia today. That parcel had been subdivided and was now up for sale on our Remax for smaller lots. So in cases like that, it's not a given that Sierra Pacific or Weyerhaeuser will simply replant the land. If the real estate value exists, they may just subdivide it into single family home lots, never replant it, and just let it be graded over into either a dust bowl that doesn't sell, assuming the housing market crashes, or it'll be sold into a subdivision. In which case, now we got to talk about things like traffic load on Spirit Lake Highway 504.
Yeah.
And if you want to talk about sheer area, I've noticed north of the 505, 504 intersection headed towards Toledo, the Toledo cutoff, as it's kind of commonly known around Tootle. If you drive just north of that and around a few bends, you'll be able to look up into the hills, and there's another parcel that was logged, I think just a couple months ago. I measured it on GIS, about 151 acres, and that was all at the same time as well. And now, context for that is it's in Lewis County. And of course, this isn't the Lewis County Board of Commissioners, but the point still stands that acreages of this area are being logged all at once. It's now a blank hillside. It looks like I'm in Northern Europe or something. Scotland, maybe.
And it's
Except-
being converted from timberland use for residential use, right?
Well, I'm not sure about, I can't say for that piece, but I just know that there are real estate signs around that one parcel of 40 acres on Spirit Lake Highway that I mentioned earlier. I mean,
So,
maybe it'll be replanted, maybe not. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So about 20 years ago, I served on the appeals, no, let's see, the Boundary Board of Adjustment that looked at annexations. And I remember a case dealing with the city of Kalama. Several interests were petitioning to annex. And one of the landowners petitioning the city to be annexed happened to be the Department of Natural Resources. And they owned a bunch of land on both sides of China Garden Road, east of Castle Rock, or of Kalama. And those parcels west of China Garden Road, they wanted to annex in because it was close to an urban area, and they saw that as a better use of the land financially. So DNR has property that is kind of in competition with the private entities. They can buy and sell. It's not in one of these limited use trusts. So I think there's probably 6 different categories of trusts that DNR has to manage. And then they have other lands, and they're trying to make money in all sorts of different ways. And they will swap lands for a whole bunch of different purposes, and trying to make as much money, minus 28% or 26% for various taxpayer groups. So it is interesting. Yeah, timberland conversion is a real challenge. More so up in the Puget Sound area than it is down here, of course. But it's going to continue to attract changes.
In that area, I am kind of concerned for the Tootle Lake area. I mean, Spirit Lake Highway obviously hasn't changed for a very long time. It's still a 2-lane highway. And with Silver Shores and other subdivisions, I believe there are new houses going in all the time in Tootle. More than often, they're on sub-acre lots. And well, I'm concerned for the area, not only because of traffic, but also when these forests are removed, contrary to the point earlier made that old growth land was less beneficial. Old growth land is full of, well, obviously old growth or second growth. And these mature trees, they shade the ground. To put it simply, they prevent the runoff that you might see in freshly clear-cut areas. They provide habitat for creatures because, I mean, why would a deer nest in a field? That's just asking for trouble. And furthermore, when they're left alone, these trees, they do die eventually, and that's true. But when they're left alone in the woods, they just act as food for other creatures, species, plants. I mean, to leave old growth alone is to have a working forest. And when it's logged, aside from, well, those slash piles that you see being burned that, well, I've lived here for 20 years, they turn the whole valley smoggy for a few days. And I can't imagine that in a good light in any context. It's not pleasant. After that slash is burned and those small trees are planted maybe a few months down the road, all that debris from those leftover all that leftover logging slash stumps, fauna on the ground, none of that can survive now without that canopy overhead, or at least the vast majority of it, which is also speaks to an invasive species problem, where suddenly you've changed the nature of that land that has just been logged into something that'll support now a plant that will enjoy open air exposure, such as Scotch broom. Happens all the time here. And not to mention the amount of carbon that's also emitted from these plants, seeing such a dramatic change in environment into the air for years to come, because these trees don't grow overnight, obviously. So really, the more old growth we preserve, the more we preserve working forests. Forests haven't existed for millions of years just to be cut down. I mean, they've provided sustenance to every form of life on Earth for as long as they've been here. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, I'm just wondering, one, I guess I'm wondering why the DNR needs 26 or maybe 28% versus other large landowners that I think you said was 14%. But the other thing is, if they have 6 different trusts that they carry lands in, can they move lands in and out of these different trusts at will? Can they sell from buy and sell in certain trusts, but others they can't? And if they can shift lands, a plot of land from one trust to another just so they can sell it, is that a thing?
What I've observed from attending these committee meetings is that the process, they do have flexibility to transfer lands, but it's incredibly complex because they have to be careful about the value, because their main sort of allegiance is to maintain revenue from the trusts. So if they can get better revenue in a different plot of land, they can move that around. But they don't like to do that. I mean, they like to manage the trusts.
Who sets the value of the land?
Independent appraisers.
And it is a pretty detailed process, which
But they do set the value of the land?
they keep track. They keep track of the value. Well, the value is going to be based on, ultimately, on the sales when they do log.
Okay, so they control what land is in what trust, and they can move it from trust to trust, and they also control the value of the land. That seems a bit convenient. So
It's not that easy. I think they really have to have an independent appraiser. So it's like, we went through all kinds of efforts when we transferred some property over to Longview for the hotel. And we couldn't just set our own value, even when we are, I think that's okay, the land of the Port of Longview.
I understand what you're saying, Arn, but you're not DNR. That's why
I'm not being what?
you're
Oh,
not DNR. I'm
Yeah.
asking about DNR. If they have control to set the price of the land or the value of the land, as well as moving it from one trust to another, so for their convenience to buy and sell.
Do you know for
Then
a
I'm-
fact
that's
that
what
they
I'm
could
asking.
set the value?
Pardon me?
Do you know for a fact that what you said is true?
That's what I'm asking you. I
Right,
just
right.
asked a minute ago and you're saying, yeah,
So-
they can because they manipulate it, but they also have to go through some technical process, which if they're the ones going through it, doesn't tell me they're getting any type of outside auditor to look at it.
The process, which I said was a very complicated process, does involve outside appraisers. I mean, they've got to do that. It tends to be an open process. There's a natural resources board of directors that is comprised of various interest groups that advises the Commissioner of Public Lands. Okay. There's also a Forest Practices Board that also sets up the rules for harvesting. And both boards have different interest groups, including representatives from the county, which is why this committee I'm going to tomorrow is in place. It's our state association's oversight of, we're hearing reports from our representatives on both of those boards. So it isn't something that the commissioner can artificially create and do just unilaterally. His hands are tied by the process that is basically set up and established by state law. They don't let the commissioner get away with a lot, but it is pretty complicated.
Well, I guess my history tells me a few years back, it used to be the schools were based on timber values. They used to have a timber tax that protected them, and that was their base.
That was through DNR. They got all that stuff through DNR.
And that's gone, correct?
No, DNR still,
Manages timber for the school districts?
yes. All those, that was the original timber trust set up from that, again, that section 16 in every township. Now, section 16 in those townships doesn't necessarily mean it's good timberland. And so they've got the flexibility to get good timberland to generate a constant flow of construction. One of the challenges is the cost of constructions have continued to go up faster than the value of the revenue coming off of the timber.
So if you
trust
can't
lands.
get land back to sell to a private enterprise through the county, can DNR, do they ever sell land to private enterprise?
I don't know. I know that they exchange, they swap. Didn't we have a little deal with the
Yeah, we had,
gentleman up on Frederick's Road?
along the Lewis River
Yeah.
Basin, a gentleman, it's involved, it's not yet totally resolved, but it's been a thing where the gentleman was going to exchange this property over here for DNR property adjacent to his property. And that's been going on for 3 years, maybe 4. And the gentleman with the property has had to go get appraisals for his property. And at that point, it just becomes a negotiation where the DNR can say, well, I think my value, the property of my value is X. I don't know that they have to justify it in that case because it's being played against a private individual that's saying, here is my 15 acres and here is your 5 acres, let's trade. So it just becomes, well, it really should be 5.5 acres or, something like that.
Okay, I appreciate the explanation. Let me try it as a yes or no answer. Does DNR ever sell land to private enterprise?
What do you think an exchange
Actually,
is?
I know they do it. In the case that I'm thinking of is that Kalama case. They sold they're developing the land for residential uses. So they're converting it from forest land in that particular area that met their goals. And so there are occasions when they sell.
That's all I wanted to know.
Yeah.
Well, a gentleman made a comment in the chat that we should ask DNR, and the answer is that's a good place to start.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay,
All right. Thanks.
okay. You see any other hands or anything? No?
It's only,
Dennis,
got
you
your
have
hand
your
up.
hand up?
Do I? I shouldn't.
I think it was Dennis.
Was it me?
It was you.
Oh. A random touch. Sorry.
Okay. We'll do this again. We will adjourn. Thank you.
Thanks.
how many times?